Are you deaf or just lost? This seating is for distinguished visitors and active duty personnel on orders, not for drifters. The voice was sharp, a polished weapon designed to cut, and it sliced through the low hum of the Ramstein Air Base passenger terminal. Colonel Richard Vance stood with his hands on his hips, his perfectly pressed flight suit a stark contrast to the man he was addressing. The man in question was old, seated on one of the plush chairs near the Space A travel desk. His clothes were clean but worn, a faded flannel shirt and khaki pants that had seen better decades. A simple, worn-out duffel bag rested at his feet. He looked up, his eyes a pale, watery blue, but they held a calmness that seemed to absorb the colonel's hostility without reflecting any of it back. He didn't seem intimidated or even surprised. He simply looked tired, like a man who had traveled a very long way, not just across an ocean, but across a lifetime. "I'm waiting for a flight," the old man said, his voice raspy but steady. Colonel Vance let out a short, incredulous laugh. "A flight? With what, a museum pass? This is an active military installation. I need to see your identification and your travel orders." Now he snapped his fingers, an arrogant, dismissive gesture that made a nearby airman first-class flinch. The young airman had been about to offer the old man a bottle of water, but now he froze, caught in the gravitational pull of the colonel's rank. The old man sighed, a slow, weary sound, and reached into the pocket of his thin jacket. He produced a laminated ID card, its edges yellowed and soft with age. He handed it to the colonel. Vance snatched it from his hand, his lip curling in disdain as he examined the faded photograph of a much younger man with the same steady eyes. "Samuel Peterson," Vance read aloud, his tone dripping with condescension. "Retired. Well, Peterson, your retirement status doesn't grant you access to priority seating meant for deploying warfighters and senior leadership. You see these men and women around you." He gestured grandly to the uniformed personnel in the terminal. "They are the tip of the spear. You are a relic. Now, take your bag and move to the general waiting area over there with the rest of the civilians." Samuel Peterson didn't move. He simply watched the colonel, his expression unreadable. "The master sergeant at the desk said I could wait here," he stated quietly, not as a challenge, but as a simple fact. This only seemed to enrage Vance further. His face flushed a dangerous shade of red. "Are you questioning my authority? I am a full-bird colonel in the United States Air Force. I am the deputy commander of this wing. That master sergeant works for me, and I am telling you to move. Or is that concept too difficult for you to grasp?" The tension in the immediate area was palpable. People tried not to stare, but they couldn't help it. They buried their faces in phones and magazines, the silence punctuated only by the colonel's biting words. The humiliation was a public spectacle. The old man was being verbally flayed by an officer who outranked nearly everyone in the building. And for what? Sitting in the wrong chair. It was a gross abuse of power, but no one dared to intervene. The young airman who had wanted to help now looked at the floor, his cheeks burning with shame for his own inaction. Samuel Peterson slowly, deliberately, pushed himself to his feet. His joints audibly popped, and he placed a hand on his lower back, a silent testament to the years he carried. He was about to reach for his bag when Colonel Vance, not yet satisfied with his display of dominance, took another step forward. "You know, your generation is what's wrong with this country," Vance sneered, his voice low enough to be just for Sam, but loud enough for those nearby to catch every venomous word. "Thinking the world owes you something for a bit of service you did 50 years ago. I've flown more combat hours in the last 5 years than you probably saw in your entire career. What did you even do? Push papers? Fix radios?" Samuel Peterson's calm finally seemed to crack, but not with anger. A flicker of something else, pity, perhaps, crossed his face. He met the colonel's glare, and for the first time, a hint of steel entered his quiet voice. "I served," he said simply. The two words, delivered with a profound and unshakable dignity, seemed to hang in the air, a shield against the colonel's barrage of insults. They were an undeniable truth, a bedrock of fact that Vance's arrogance couldn't erode. But for Vance, this quiet defiance was the final straw. It was insubordination from a man he had already dismissed as worthless. He felt his authority being subtly challenged, and he couldn't stand it. "You served?" Vance laughed again, a harsh, ugly sound. "Everyone served. That doesn't make you special. I bet you were a glorified mechanic. Come on, tell me. Let's hear the heroic story of your service. What unit were you in? What was your job? He was goading him now, trying to force a confession of mediocrity to justify his own cruelty. The old man's gaze drifted past the colonel, toward the massive window overlooking the flight line where a C-17 Globemaster was being loaded. It was a look of deep, distant memory, as if he were seeing something else entirely. Phantoms of other aircraft, other places, other wars. It was a long time ago, Sam said, his voice softening. Details get hazy. This evasiveness was like blood in the water for a shark like Vance. Oh, I'm sure they do. Conveniently hazy. Look, I've had enough of this. One last question, old-timer. Every pilot, every operator worth his salt, has a call sign. It's a badge of honor. So let's have it. What was your call sign? I'm sure it's a real knee-slapper. Puddle Jumper 1 foot? Mailman 6? He leaned in, his face inches from Samuel's, a smug, triumphant grin spreading across his features. He had him pinned. There would be no impressive answer, just the mumbled, embarrassing confession of a nobody, and Vance would have his victory. The terminal seemed to hold its breath. The young airman looked up, his heart pounding. The master sergeant behind the travel desk paused his typing, his eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. The entire room was an unwilling audience, waiting for the final, crushing blow. Samuel Peterson held the colonel's gaze. The weariness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a fire that seemed to burn away the years, revealing the man he once was. When he spoke, his voice was not loud, but it carried an impossible weight, a resonance that cut through every other sound in the vast terminal. It was the voice of command, of certainty, of history itself. Hawk 8. The words dropped into the silence like a depth charge. For a moment, nothing happened. The name meant nothing to Colonel Vance, who just scoffed, ready with another insult. But he never got to say it. Across the room, a grizzled master sergeant, a man with salt and pepper hair and a chest full of ribbons from his own long career, froze mid-sip from his coffee cup. The ceramic mug slipped from his fingers and shattered on the polished floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden, profound quiet. His head snapped toward the old man, his eyes wide with disbelief, then with a dawning, electrifying reverence. A few older civilian contractors, men with military pasts etched into their faces, slowly lowered their newspapers. An Army Command Sergeant Major who was passing through stopped dead in his tracks, his head cocked, as if he'd heard a ghost. The name echoed in the minds of the few who knew. It wasn't a name from the official histories. It was a name from the shadows, a piece of whispered lore, a legend spoken of in hushed tones in classified briefing rooms and lonely forward operating bases. It was a myth. Colonel Vance, oblivious, was about to continue his tirade. Hawk what? Is that supposed to impress me? But his words were cut off. The master sergeant who had dropped his coffee was already moving. He strode past the colonel as if he weren't there, his back ramrod straight, his movements precise and filled with purpose. He stopped 2 feet in front of Samuel Peterson, his body snapping to the most rigid, respectful position of attention Vance had ever seen. He raised his hand in a salute so sharp it could have cut glass. "Sir," the master sergeant said, his voice thick with emotion. "Master Sergeant Evans, 3rd Special Tactics Squadron. It is an honor, sir. A profound honor." Vance was utterly bewildered. "What in God's name is the meaning of this, Master Sergeant?" "Stand down. You do not salute a retired civilian in this terminal." But Master Sergeant Evans didn't even flicker. His eyes remained locked on Samuel Peterson. "I'm not saluting a civilian, Colonel," Evans said, his voice ringing with conviction. "I'm saluting a ghost." Just then, a new figure entered the scene, drawn by the commotion and the sound of the shattering mug. General Marcus Thompson, commander of United States Air Forces in Europe, was on his way to his aircraft, his 4-star rank parting the crowds like a ship's bow through water. His face was a thundercloud of annoyance. He hated public displays, especially from his senior officers. "Colonel Vance, what is all this?" he boomed, his voice accustomed to filling hangars and commanding obedience. Vance spun around, his face a mixture of shock and relief. "General, sir, my apologies. I was just dealing with a civilian who was refusing to." He stopped mid-sentence. The general was no longer looking at him. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, had found Samuel Peterson. The thundercloud on the general's face vanished, instantly replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock, which then morphed into something Vance could not comprehend on the face of a four-star general. Awe. Absolute, reverent awe. General Thompson did something that stunned every person in that terminal. He walked directly past the saluting Colonel Vance without a glance. He walked past the still-at-attention Master Sergeant Evans. He walked straight up to the old man in the faded flannel shirt, stood before him, and rendered the sharpest, most heartfelt salute of his entire decorated career. "Sam," the general whispered, his voice cracking slightly. "My God, is it really you?" Samuel Peterson, the man they called Hawk 8, slowly raised a hand and returned the salute with the practiced ease of a lifetime. A small, sad smile touched his lips. "It's been a while, Marcus." The entire terminal was now utterly silent and still. Every eye was locked on the tableau. A four-star general saluting an old man who looked like he didn't have a penny to his name. Colonel Vance stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape, his world tilting on its axis. He couldn't process what he was seeing. General Thompson held his salute for a long moment before slowly lowering his hand. He turned, and his gaze fell upon Colonel Vance. The warmth and reverence in his eyes instantly evaporated, replaced by a glacial fury so intense it made Vance feel like the air had been sucked from his lungs. "Colonel," General Thompson said, his voice dangerously quiet, "do you have any idea who you were speaking to?" "Sir, he's a retired." "His ID," said Peterson. Vance stammered, his arrogance dissolving into panicked confusion. "His name," the general cut in, his voice like chipping ice, "is Chief Master Sergeant Samuel Peterson. And while that is the name the Air Force officially gave him, it is not the name by which legends know him. To the men whose lives he saved, to the operators he flew into hell and back, to the very soul of the Special Operations community, he is known by one name and one name only." Hawk 8-inch the general took a step closer to Vance, his eyes burning with a righteous fire. "Let me educate you, Colonel, on a piece of history you clearly missed while you were polishing your eagle. In the late 1960s, there was a clandestine unit flying highly modified aircraft over denied territory. They didn't officially exist. Their missions were never recorded. The men who flew them were ghosts. Their leader, the pilot who flew the most dangerous missions, the one who wrote the book on high-altitude, low-opening insertions, the man who could fly a wounded bird through a storm of anti-aircraft fire and bring his boys home, was Hawk 8-inch. He pointed a finger not at Vance, but at Sam. This man flew AC-130, nicknamed the Credible Sport, with rockets strapped to its fuselage, in a test for a mission to rescue hostages. The plane crashed. He was burned over 60% of his body. 3 months later, he was flying again. He flew into a valley so deep and so heavily defended that it was called the Devil's Jaw to rescue a Green Beret A team that was about to be overrun. He had no air cover, no support, and one of his engines was on fire. He landed that plane on a strip of dirt no bigger than a football field under constant enemy fire, loaded up every last man, and flew out through the same wall of lead. Every man on that team is alive today because of him. The general's voice grew louder, resonating through the silent terminal. Every person, from the youngest airman to the oldest traveler, was captivated, listening to a story of impossible heroism. He was shot down 2 years later. He spent 4 years in a prisoner of war camp that no one knew existed. He was declared dead. The Medal of Honor was awarded to him posthumously in a classified ceremony. His family received a folded flag. Then, through a quiet prisoner exchange, he came home. He refused any public accolades. He refused to have his status as a living recipient made public. He just wanted to disappear. He wanted peace. He gave this country his youth, his health, and nearly his life, and in return, he asked for nothing. Nothing. General Thompson finally turned his full, wrathful attention back to the pale, trembling colonel. "You stand here in your perfect uniform, dripping with rank and entitlement, and you berate a man who has more courage, honor, and integrity in his little finger than you will ever possess in your entire lifetime. You questioned his service? Colonel, you are not worthy to stand in the same room as him, let alone breathe the same air. You are an officer. You are supposed to be a leader of men. But you are nothing more than a bully and a disgrace to that uniform and the rank you wear. The general's words were not a reprimand. They were a vivisection, laying Vance's character bare for all to see. The humiliation Vance had tried to inflict upon Sam was now returned to him 1,000-fold, not out of spite, but as the inevitable consequence of his own actions. Master Sergeant Evans, the general commanded. Evans, still at attention, responded instantly. Sir, escort Chief Master Sergeant Peterson to my personal quarters. See that he gets a hot meal, a fresh uniform, and anything else he needs. He is to be my guest for as long as he wishes to stay. Yes, General, Evans said, his voice filled with pride. He turned to Sam. Sir, if you'll come with me, Sam nodded and picked up his worn duffel bag. But before he walked away, he stopped and looked at the utterly broken Colonel Vance. Then General Thompson addressed Vance one last time, his voice dropping back to that deadly, quiet tone. You, Colonel, will report to my office at 0600 tomorrow morning in your service dress uniform. You and I are going to have a very long, very unpleasant conversation about your future. And I assure you, after today, it is going to be exceptionally short. Now, get out of my sight. Vance, his face ashen, could only manage a choked. Yes, sir. He turned and walked away, not with the confident stride of a commander, but with the shuffling gait of a defeated man. The crowd of onlookers, silent until now, began to breathe again. A few of them, old veterans and active duty alike, began to quietly applaud as Sam walked past, led by the proud Master Sergeant. It was a soft, respectful sound that filled the space left by the colonel's shame. Later that evening, after a hot meal and a long conversation with his old friend General Thompson, Sam was resting in the VIP quarters. There was a soft knock on the door. It was Colonel Vance. His eyes were red-rimmed, his uniform immaculate, but seeming to hang on a diminished frame. He held his flight cap in his hands, twisting it nervously. Sir, Vance began, his voice barely a whisper. May I have a word? Sam gestured for him to enter. Vance stepped inside, but remained standing stiffly by the door. Sir, there are no words to properly express how ashamed I am. My behavior was inexcusable. It was arrogant, cruel, and dishonorable. I failed as an officer, and I failed as a human being. I can't take back what I said, but I can offer my most profound and sincere apology. I am sorry. I was wrong. He looked Sam directly in the eye, and for the first time, the old hero saw not a colonel, but a man, a flawed, humbled man facing the wreckage of his own character. Sam Peterson studied him for a long moment. There was no anger in his gaze, no desire for retribution. There was only a deep, abiding wisdom earned through unimaginable hardship. He nodded slowly. We all have bad days, son, he said, his raspy voice gentle. Moments where we let the worst parts of ourselves take control. It's what you do next, in the moment after you've failed, that truly defines you. He stood up and walked over to the younger man, placing a frail but steady hand on his shoulder. Your apology is accepted, Colonel. Now go and be the leader your people deserve. Learn from this. Let it make you better. A single tear traced a path down Richard Vance's cheek. He nodded, unable to speak. He rendered a slow, perfect salute, holding it until Sam acknowledged it with a nod. Then he turned and left, a man irrevocably changed, carrying a lesson in humility that would last him the rest of his life. As the door clicked shut, Sam Peterson walked to the window, looking out at the endless night sky, the same sky he had once owned, a silent testament to the fact that the greatest heroes are often the ones who walk among us, completely unseen, asking for nothing.